David thought the world would be his oyster. Raised in a quiet, middle-class suburb in Ohio, he grew up believing in the American dream. He studied hard, got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and even earned a scholarship to a respectable university. He did everything right, or so he thought. But the world he stepped into after graduation didn't match what he had been promised. In job interview after job interview, David noticed a strange pattern. He'd make it to the final round, sometimes even shaking hands with the hiring manager, only to be told later that they were going in a different direction. The words felt hollow. He'd see the job reposted online the next week. Over drinks with friends, he heard stories of diversity quotas, of boxes being checked, of companies needing a more inclusive image. David couldn't help but feel like he was being quietly passed over, not for lack of talent, but because of who he was, a white man in a world rapidly trying to course correct. Now, let's be real. This isn't a sob story about someone losing a job to someone more qualified. This is about feeling invisible in a system that claims to care about fairness. David wasn't bitter. He supported equality, believed in equal opportunity, and wanted everyone to succeed. But he also believed in merit. He believed effort and skill should win the day. Yet over and over, he watched less experienced candidates leapfrog over him, while he was told to keep expanding his network and revisiting his resume. At first, he thought it was just bad luck. Then came the office job he finally landed at a marketing firm in Chicago. On his first day, he overheard a coworker joke that another Chad got through the door. Laughter followed. David smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Over time, those jokes became more pointed. He was labeled a privileged bro, even though he was working 2 side gigs just to afford rent. He didn't come from wealth, he didn't have connections, but none of that mattered. What mattered, apparently, was the color of his skin. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment down below telling us where you're watching from. We want to hear your story too. Now, back to David. The harder he worked, the more isolated he became. His ideas were dismissed in meetings unless echoed by someone else. His attempts at camaraderie were met with suspicion, and any time he tried to speak up, he was met with silence, or worse, accusations of being defensive. He wasn't allowed to talk about struggle. He wasn't allowed to question anything. He was expected to sit, listen, and agree. That pressure built up. At night, he'd scroll through social media, seeing post after post about fragile white men and how they needed to step aside. But step aside for who, and for how long? David didn't want special treatment, he just wanted a fair shot. But in this new world, fairness started to feel like a fading memory. And as the days went on, he began to wonder, is there a place left in society for someone like him? Or is he simply being pushed out, one silent rejection at a time? David started noticing things most people would brush off, like how HR posters in the break room now showcased only certain faces, or how every committee focused on promoting underrepresented voices, but somehow never asked for his. There were unconscious bias trainings where he was told that just by existing, he was part of a problem, that no matter how hard he tried to be a good person, he carried the burden of sins he never committed. He sat there, quiet, while his coworkers nodded and shared stories of being silenced, and yet here he was, unable to speak. It was as if his story no longer mattered. When he tried to talk to his supervisor about how this atmosphere made him feel invisible, he was told he was missing the point, that this was a time for him to listen, not to center himself, that he had privilege and therefore should use it to lift others up. But what if his privilege didn't pay the bills? What if his so-called advantage didn't land him the promotion, or the bonus, or even basic respect? One afternoon, things came to a head. David was passed over, again, for a project he'd developed from scratch. It was handed to someone else, someone with less experience, less time at the company, but a more diverse background, as his boss explained. "It's about optics," the manager said, as if that made it okay. David went home that night, sat on his worn-out couch, and stared at the ceiling. He thought about all the years he'd worked, all the sacrifices, all the nights eating ramen while grinding through unpaid internships. None of it seemed to matter now. He began to feel like a ghost in his own life, not hated, just unseen. And being unseen can be worse than being disliked. It makes you doubt your existence. Was he wrong for feeling this way? Was he selfish for wanting recognition? Was it racist to admit that, for the first time in his life, being white felt like a mark against him? He wasn't looking to reclaim some imagined glory. He just wanted to feel like he mattered again. That night, he opened his laptop and searched for others like him. At first, it was hard to find anything. Most of what he saw painted people like him as whiners or victims of imagined oppression. But then he found a forum, buried deep on the internet, where people shared stories just like his. Stories of being overlooked, dismissed, judged before speaking. He read for hours. A teacher in California who felt punished for being the wrong color during curriculum reform. A fireman in New York told he didn't understand what real struggle meant despite having risked his life for over a decade. A newlywed in Texas whose small business was denied a grant because it wasn't demographically aligned with our equity goals. The pain wasn't just his, it was bigger. And it didn't come from hate, but from the slow erosion of fairness, the quiet push that said, not you, not now, maybe never. David didn't want to rage. He didn't want to fight back. He just wanted to belong in the world he helped build, without being told to apologize for it. David knew he had a choice. He could keep shrinking, keep lowering his head and pretending everything was fine, or he could stand up for himself, even if no one wanted to hear it. The problem was, he didn't know how to speak without being labeled something he wasn't. Every time he raised a concern or asked a question, it was twisted into a narrative of fragility, privilege, or entitlement. But he wasn't fragile. He was exhausted. He wasn't privileged. He was drowning in student loans, working weekends just to stay afloat, and he wasn't entitled. He was desperate for the same fair shot that used to be a promise in this country. So he started documenting everything: emails, performance reviews, messages about internal opportunities, side conversations. It wasn't to attack anyone. It was to protect his sanity, to create a record that proved to himself that he wasn't going crazy, that this wasn't in his head. The more he tracked, the clearer it became. He was being held to a different standard, not because of incompetence, not because of attitude, but because he was white. That was the part no one wanted to admit. Eventually, he reached a breaking point. One day during a team-wide Zoom call, a new DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion consultant gave a presentation. Halfway through, she asked everyone to share how their racial identity had affected their place in the company. Person after person spoke up, sharing pain, sharing progress, sharing feelings of empowerment. When it came to David, he hesitated. But something inside him snapped. He unmuted himself and, calmly but firmly, explained that he felt like his identity had become a barrier, that despite years of effort, loyalty, and results, he felt less seen, less heard, and less valued than ever. The chat box lit up instantly. Some supported him. Some accused him of centering himself. The consultant thanked him for his vulnerability, but quickly pivoted back to the agenda. The moment passed like it never happened. And yet, afterward, Several coworkers messaged him privately, thanking him, some white, some not. They admitted they felt similar but were too afraid to say anything. That was when David realized he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was speaking for a growing number of people living in silence. He decided to write, not just in forums or comments, but publicly. He started a blog called Equal Means Equal. He didn't write from a place of anger, but from clarity, from heartbreak, from lived experience. He told the truth, that equity shouldn't mean erasing one group to elevate another, that fairness had to be for everyone, or it meant nothing. The blog started small, but within weeks it began to spread. Emails came in from all over: Idaho, South Carolina, Montana, even a nurse from Alaska. Men and women, mostly working class, mostly people who weren't trying to stir up drama, just trying to make it through life without being made to feel guilty for who they were. His words gave them permission to breathe. Of course, backlash came too. Accusations, insults, labels like anti-progress or tone deaf. But David didn't back down. He wasn't against progress. He was for inclusion that included everyone. He didn't want to be the center of the conversation. He just wanted to be in the room, valued, heard, and treated like a human being, not a placeholder for someone else's guilt or agenda. In the months that followed, David's blog became more than just a voice. It became a movement. Not the kind you see on TV or trending on social media, but the quiet, steady kind that builds under the surface. It was people from small towns and big cities, from warehouses and classrooms and tech firms, all sharing one thing: the feeling of being told that their struggles didn't count. David made sure the blog stayed grounded. No sensationalism, no rage, just honest stories. He featured voices from veterans who felt like strangers in their own country, from single dads navigating courts that assumed the worst, from white college students who were told outright that certain scholarships weren't for people like them. He was careful to include nuance, to never frame this as a war of one group against another. He just wanted truth. He wanted fairness to be real again. And he knew that meant building bridges, not burning them. He didn't allow hate speech, didn't allow victim complexes, and refused to let bitterness take over. His platform was about dignity, for everyone. Of course, his job didn't see it that way. HR eventually called him in. They cited the blog as a reputation concern. They danced around it with legal words, but the message was clear. He was becoming a problem. When David asked what specifically he had said that violated company values, they couldn't answer. They just said it didn't align with our current DEI strategy. It wasn't about what he did wrong. It was about the fact that he had spoken it all. And so, David walked away, voluntarily, but not freely. He left behind a paycheck, health insurance, and the few friends who were brave enough to talk to him in the break room. But he also left with something more valuable: his voice. He had finally learned that silence wouldn't protect him, that shrinking himself wouldn't make the world fairer. And maybe, just maybe, by speaking up, he was giving permission to others who felt the same pain but didn't know how to name it. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man who refused to be erased by a system that only saw him as a stereotype. Now David travels. He doesn't run seminars or write books. He just talks. At small gatherings, community colleges, town halls, places where real people gather without cameras or applause to talk about what fairness really means. He listens to young white students who feel ashamed to raise their hands in class. He listens to construction workers who feel like they're walking on eggshells every day. But he also listens to people of color, to immigrants, to others who share how they've been hurt too, and he embraces those truths without defensiveness. Because David understands now that it isn't about denying anyone's pain. It's about refusing to erase your own. His message is simple. No one should be punished for how they were born, and no one should be silenced for speaking truth respectfully. In a world where people are desperate to be seen, maybe real justice isn't about taking turns. It's about finally learning how to stand together. David's story doesn't end with a trophy or a title. It ends with something better. Being seen, finally, for who he really is. A human being, no more, no less.